Welcome back for another episode, CRM Radio. Today, the voice of customer relationship management with the one man brave enough to ask the questions we can only dare. Stacy Gentile. You know, I think you are like Jack Nicholson in A Few Brave Men. You're asking the questions that we're not ready for the answer. You can't handle
the truth.
But you're going to bring it out today here. You're going to find it and dig it out today. I just know you are.
Of course. You know, usually on this show, we cover issues of a wide swath covering sales and marketing and general business leadership. When I put together the guest on the calendar for this year, this is probably the one show that I was looking the most forward to doing, because any of our listeners that have been on my programs, they know that I always talk about how important it is to be intentional, especially when it comes to sales and marketing and being a leader. But I think there's a broader component to that talks about why. Why are you doing what you do? And I think today's guest, Dora Lutz, is going to really help us kind of really unpack that and get into it. Hi, Dora.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Dora hails from the great city of Indianapolis, Indiana, and she is the founder and CEO of GivingSpring, and she's also the author of a book called The Aspirational Business. Dora, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I have the opportunity and the privilege of working with a wide variety of CEOs and business leaders who are trying to build profit and also make the world a better place. So that can be done in a lot of different ways, but I do a lot of coaching and mentoring in that space. I teach at Purdue University. I have held a few positions working with the United Nations and helping them figure out how they can leverage volunteerism to work towards the Sustainable Development Goals.
Which is fantastic. And so how would you define, in your terms, about what an aspirational business is?
Yeah, so there are 5 criteria, actually, that make an aspirational business. But at its core, an aspirational business is any organization that is using a sustainably financial model in a way that allows them to continue to grow, and also in a way that makes some sort of positive impact in the world. So both the financial KPIs need to be measurable, and so does the social impact.
I think when someone's thinking about, the why to their business, when they unpeel the onion and they get to that, I think there's 2 sides to this coin, right? So you've probably got like a startup or an entrepreneur, right, where they can kind of inherently bake it into everything before it starts. And then you've also got perhaps established companies, maybe even some large companies or big brands who want to maybe shift gears and kind of build in the why into what they're doing. I know that in your book and what you do, you talk about the social entrepreneur. So let's maybe unpack that one first. How does that kind of play out in your experience when they're starting the companies with it baked in?
That's a great question. To be very honest, as much as anything, it's the power of that why. So I have some social entrepreneurs who resonate very highly with that statement. I work with somebody right now who has a straw. It's a plastic straw alternative that's made out of biodegradable materials. So in 3 weeks, it's totally gone, and if it ends up in the water source, it turns into fish food. So for him, as he grows his business, the number one priority for him is going to make sure that sustainability is never compromised, but he also wants it to be a for-profit business model. So he comes to it with this idea of how do we make ecologically sustainable solutions, and everything falls into that lens. But financial indicators are still equally important. Versus another traditional entrepreneur who may also have a why that's important, but they lead with the financial indicators and they say, all right, I want to make sure that profitability comes first, and then I'm going to make my secondary decisions based off of the social impact. So if something costs me a little more, I might still choose to use that material, even if it's a little more costly, if it adds some value to the environment or to my product in the long run. But I'm leading with the financial indicators. So there's sort of a spectrum between why somebody leads it, but you can be a very financially focused, profit motive CEO and still lead a social enterprise, or you can be mission focused and still want to have sustainable financials and be a social enterprise also.
I'm curious to get your thoughts on what percentage would you say of entrepreneurs who are like in the startup phase, maybe very early stage, like within the first year that they're doing it or even conceptualizing starting their business, what percentage of them do you think are baking in this aspirational aspect of their businesses, and how do you think the millennial generation kind of plays into that with the startups?
Yeah, oh gosh. So there's two questions there. I think that a significant portion of startups at this point would qualify as social entrepreneurships, but a lot of them don't realize that that's what they're doing. So when I do a talk on social innovation or social enterprise 101, I almost always have a handful of people come up afterwards and say, I'm doing that work and I didn't know that that's what I was doing, and you've given me a framework now to help me think about how I grow the business. I think it's inherent and people just aren't self-identifying with that language yet because they just think of themselves as entrepreneurs.
Right. And it probably makes everything easier right from the get-go, right? Because there's a back-end clearly defined goal and mission, and from that it determines how you sell, how you market, how you hire and retain, how you build the environment of the office. I mean, it's got to be so much easier to bake it in from the beginning, right?
It is, from the goal of marketing and hiring and all those things that you mentioned. I'm finding that it's actually hard to get investment. So if you're in startup mode and you're trying to seek investors who align with your mission, sometimes that's proving to be a challenge, at least in Indiana. I think it's a little more readily available on the coast. But my instinct is that in the next 6 months, 6 months to 6 years, investment in the social space will be easier to be found. But yes, you can hire people. 68% of job seekers say that they want to work for a company that makes a significant difference, and they're willing to take a pay cut to do so. Customers, 98% of customers say that they're interested in a company's corporate social responsibility initiatives. And actually, there's a lot of data that shows that companies paying attention to this space benefit in terms of lower risk management costs and higher ethical leadership components. So there's a lot of data out there that shows that it's good business. And
was a lot of those data points in the book that you wrote? So if maybe our listeners wanted to go back and kind of dig into that, was that in there?
Yes, I actually do have a lot of the data points in the Aspirational Business book. And if they go to giving-spring.com, I also have several blogs that focus on one component of data. Maybe we talk specifically about human resource benefits, risk management benefits, and marketing benefits. I break them down by functional area usually.
The bottom line there is that corporations are inherently about generating profits, creating shareholder returns. So one of these types of efforts clearly helps that bottom line in a number of ways, right?
It absolutely does.
And of those ones that you mentioned, what do you think is the biggest, quickest, most impactful bang for the buck? Is it the retention? Is it the go-to-market strategy? Where's the big payoff in there, the quick return?
I think the most immediate return is in the employee engagement space and in the ability to attract and retain. Because obviously those people are the individuals who are impacting the rest of the business. So what I usually say is the CEO has to lead the mission by creating that why and creating the vision statement. Then the next person to support this mission is the CFO, because of course, if that person hasn't bought into this, it's a lot harder to make all those trade-offs between making a socially responsible decision versus an easier decision, right? If that gatekeeper hasn't bought in, then you leverage your HR team to make sure that they're bringing on the right talent. After that, the operations team makes sure that everything is aligned, that the processes, the expectations, the incentives, all of the things that operations teams manage, that they're in line, and then you tell the story last. So the marketing team should be the last team that touches an aspirational business approach to talking about your work.
And in today's market too, with the especially in the millennial generation, especially when considering the startups and the younger entrepreneurs, the economy right now is booming, right? I mean, unemployment's at an all-time low. I think the hunt for talent is tough, right? Because there's less people looking for work in the marketplace, so you're going to probably have to steal them away from other companies. The aspirational aspect to be able to do that's got to be a big benefit, I would think.
It is. I sometimes joke that if you don't have this type of business strategy in place to attract Gen Z or millennials, that they're just going to go do it themselves, and that should scare the heck out of people because talent is so tight, but also because they're going to figure out how to do it in a way that creates long-term benefit for society, and they're going to take the generation after them. I mean, it's an opportunity and it's also a threat. Because my experience with these students, and I have about 150 of them every semester, is that they are not sitting around waiting for somebody to give them the job that they want. They're going out and trying to create it themselves.
Let me play devil's advocate with that aspirational thing and the hiring thing. And this is maybe a question that you don't get. Is there maybe any ways in the hiring process where it might make it more difficult? Like if your primary mission is to say, let's say, save the whales or save the puppies or the kittens, does that potentially narrow the talent that you can kind of attract in some way, shape, or form? Is there a way it could negatively impact the hiring processes?
Gosh, that's a great question. I don't know that I've been asked that before. I imagine if you were not asking for authenticity, right? So if somebody wanted the job and they didn't really care about what you were working towards, and then down the road that turned into conflict, that they said, I really don't care about this. So that might have been an indicator that wasn't the right person, and they knew how to play the game to get the job, and then they turned around and weren't the right person. That might be one. But generally speaking, is it harder to find somebody who's going to care about your mission? My experience is that most of the people you're competing against are not talking about those missions. So it's sort of blue ocean strategy at work.
I think that's a great segue into the authenticity thing, right? Because even in our personal interactions, like when we meet somebody for the first time or we've known somebody for more than a minute, we can instantly tell who's authentic and who isn't. And I think consumers can feel the same way about brands, whether they're startups or established brands, about whether or not they're authentic. So when you think companies are buying into this aspirational aspect, how important is it for them to really drive that authenticity? I mean, because you've got to be really dedicated to that, right? It's got to be in every meeting. It's got to be in every thing of literature and everything that you take to market outside and inside. You really have to be committed to that, right?
Yes, you absolutely do. Because if you are not, especially in this day and age of social media, people will see right through it. And I think there is some data out there that shows that if you have a public relations crisis, you make some sort of gaffe or error. If you have engaged in corporate social responsibility activities that are perceived to be authentic, to your point, that you actually have a lower risk of hurting your earnings versus an organization where it's not perceived as authentic. Give one of my favorite examples. Your marketing team says, we care about building green, sustainable engines, while your engineers are falsifying emissions testing in the back room. It's only a matter of time before that's going to come out. And it may come out in a news story. It may come out on social media. But if your employees are seeing it, the rest of the world is going to know about it too.
And I think that's a great segue. We're going to take a quick commercial break, Dora. And when we come back, I want to focus a little bit more about talking about corporations and how they can kind of steer the boat around to be more aspirational. Take it away, Paul.
We know you rely on your CRM system, and it's usually a love-hate relationship. Most CRM systems, well, let's face it, they're expensive. They're hard to understand. People don't use them properly. And you're probably paying for features that you don't even want. If that's your case, then maybe it's time to simplify. It's time to get more from your CRM. Why don't you go back to the original? Trust Goldmine. We helped pioneer the industry, after all. Goldmine CRM is, well, it's simple, it's affordable, and it's proven. If all those sound appealing to you, if you're just tired of the CRM headaches that you're getting from trying to implement something that's just too complicated, too expensive, and too much for you to figure out, then why not go back to the original? Visit Goldmine today, goldmine.com. Okay, but before you do that, let's go back to Stacy and his guest.
And we're back. Before the break, we were talking about aspirational businesses here with Dora Lutz, and talking about the two types of companies that typically really get into this, which it would be easier with starting a company so you can kind of bake it in. But now I kind of want to shift gears and I want to talk more about the corporate end, where they may have a feeling or a business reason that they want to become aspirational, and how they can kind of switch directions and get back into being authentic more and having these types of things in their businesses. So Dora, when we first met in Indianapolis, it was, probably 10 years ago now. I think at the time you might have been working for Sandler Sales Consulting or Lucian or somebody like that. I was doing internal brand universities for big companies, helping them figure out their whys and doing their kind of dispulsion of those messages inside of their companies. And it was difficult. So I imagine your background is kind of like a sales coach or consultant, probably helps you have those conversations with CEOs who want to undertake these kind of changings, right? That must have been a big asset to you.
Yes and no, I would say, actually. I was actually more in a marketing strategy role back when you and I met. And so a lot of what I was doing was building marketing strategies for corporate parties and for nonprofits. And my frustration was that it was a lot of lip service. Nobody was really doing what they said they were going to do. And so that is what started my mission to say, how do businesses actually engage in the community in a way that drives value? Who owns it? If it's not marketing, who is it? And of course, ultimately, the discovery that I came to was that everybody owns it. It has to be across the entire C-suite or it doesn't gain any traction.
Right. But would you say it's most important that the CEO buys into it? I mean, that is really the head of the organization. When you get into these conversations with corporations or larger corporations, do you find that it's absolutely critical that the person at the top of the food chain has the most buy-in?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, I will not work with companies that do not have CEO buy-in. If the HR manager comes and says, I want to do this and I'm ready to put together a program, and the CEO and the CFO have not already said that this is something that aligns with what they want to do, I would be wasting their money to do those efforts because it's going to fall through the cracks somewhere.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I used to run into when I was doing consulting and dealing with the CEOs is I found, especially when it comes to the marketing thing, and I would assume it's the same on the aspirational end, most CEOs came up through the ranks through the financial department, right? They were CFOs before they were CEOs. I think if you take a look at American corporations or Fortune 500 corporations, that would mostly be the case. You don't see a lot of companies that have had as marketing people or HR people really move into that CEO chair. Do you think that's maybe one of the key things that's holding them back, is because the financial stuff is, very left brain thinking. It's not as emotional. It's not as touchy feely. It's not as maybe community driven. It's facts, figures, profits, those types of things. Do you think that how people move into the CEO job affects the number of companies that want to undertake an aspirational challenge?
I don't know about that. I actually find a lot of CEOs or CFOs who are interested in this space because they're being very thoughtful about how the money is being spent. So they look at philanthropic dollars and want to know how is this benefiting us? And I think that's a really responsible and appropriate question for them to ask, and that helps lend credence to the work if we can show how it's impacting the bottom line. Interestingly, Lawrence Fink with BlackRock, I think it was at the end of 2017, wrote an entire letter to his shareholders where he talked about risk management and community engagement and aspirational business, my words, not his, as a strategic need. And he basically said, if you're not looking at the long-term impact of your business on society, you're not taking a long-term enough view, and we will not invest in you. So what I really appreciate about that is, for as positive and optimistic, and let's look at the upside as I am, he comes to it with more of that risk management, financial, what's the possible downside, And yet he and I come to the same agreement that this is just good business strategy.
That's interesting. In your findings with the CEOs that say, they're coming from an established corporation and they want to undertake one of these aspirational challenges and kind of steer the ship maybe in a different direction, how much of that do you think is driven from wanting to leave a legacy perhaps versus even the profit side of things?
75-25. I don't think you undertake this work unless you really believe in the power of the legacy and the work that you're doing. The challenge becomes not that people don't want to leave a legacy, but that they don't really know how to make a business case for it. So How are you going to prove that it actually drives profit? If, in the next 3 years, in the next 10 years, how is this a long-term imperative for the organization?
When the CEO, let's say they have that epiphany moment, or they want to maybe drive more profits, or if they want to undertake that legacy issue and they made the commitment to do it, what is the process to go through for some of those changes? Because I know you've got there's 30 different ways that you talk about in your book that they can do it, right?
Right. There are 30 different ways that you can sort of build it into your business model. But I think the easiest starting point for a CEO who says, I'm ready to do something more than just think about profitability, the key are the sustainable development goals. So if anybody Googles Sustainable Development Goal or SDG, I think it's sustainabledevelopment.un.org, you can find 17 different categories that all 197 member nations have said we have to do this to be sustainable as a human race. And it's easier to look at those and say, oh, our business, we're really focused on creating decent work and infrastructure, or decent work and we care about climate action. Whatever it is your organization starts to, that's a great starting point for exploration, because then you can just kind of go down this rabbit hole that's very targeted and say, okay, I now understand why our business matters, and it makes it easier to align a vision than just looking at the whole blue sky option of ways you could make the world a better place and not being able to find direction.
And I think that's a great way to kind of wrap it up. The why about what you're doing with your business, I think, is the most important thing, because it drives everything that the business does. Dora, is there a way that our listeners could get a hold of you or get in touch with you if this was something that they wanted to kind of pursue or learn more about?
Absolutely. If you go to giving-spring.com or aspirationalbusiness.com. Both of those will take you to my website. I have a lot of free resources. I have some free webinars. I've got downloads, links to the book, and quite a few blog posts that talk about some of the things we've discussed today.
That's awesome. Well, it's been great having you on the show, Dora. It's great to catch up. And I'm telling you, if you're listening to the program today and you want to find your why, Dora is the one that can help you do it.
I'd love to. Thanks for allowing me to be on the show, and thank you for your challenging and insightful questions.
Great. Thank you, Dora.
I'll talk to you soon.
You've been listening to the ever-challenging CRM Radio today, right here in the Funnel Radio Network, for at-work listeners like you.